God forgives sins. God forgives sins. God forgives sins in this all-encompassing forgiveness that we see with Jesus here. The slate's wiped clean. Your sins are forgiven. And verse 22, Jesus knew what they were thinking and asked. Jesus knew. Remember, they're thinking these thoughts in their minds. Who is this blasphemer? Only God can forgive sins. What's going on in their head? They probably didn't say anything out loud. It was an awkward moment. Can you imagine this? Here they are looking at him, questioning him, doubting who he is. And this man comes lowered down through the roof. The spotlight's on him. The heat is on. The crowd is with Jesus because he's been healing and doing miraculous things. And they've gathered from all corners of Judaism to test this man. Who can forgive sins but God alone? And Jesus knew what they were thinking. You see, every once in a while we see this with the God-man. That the hem is gathered up on the corner and underneath we see divinity peeking out. Who is this man? Not just any man. And he asked, why are you thinking these things in your heart? Why are you thinking these things in your hearts? Do you see anybody answering him here? Do you see them answering at all? No, they're awkward in this situation. They don't know what to say. Why are you thinking these things in your hearts? And suddenly, everything's stripped away and they know that Jesus knows what's going on in their head. That they're thinking he's false. And then he says in verse 23, which is easier to say your sins are forgiven or to say get up and walk? Boy, he's got him pinned down here. They've got him pinned down too if he's false. But he's got them pinned down. Check. Is it easier to say your sins are forgiven? Or to say, get up and walk? Moment of truth. I bet you could have heard a pin drop in that room. They didn't say a word. They sat there in astonishment, I think, first of all, because they realized Jesus knew what was going on in their hearts and minds. But he asked them a pointed question, and they don't know how to answer that question. And then in verse 24, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the paralyzed man, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. Now this all happens rather instantaneously, but I think there was probably a half second there that must have hung there like an eternity. What is easier, to say your sins are forgiven, or to tell this man to get up and go home to heal him? And then Jesus tells him, get up and take your mat and go home. What will happen? Everything hangs here. If the man doesn't get up, they can charge Jesus with being a deceit. They can take this crowd right now and say, the Roman authorities aren't around. Let's take him out back. Let's stone him. He's a false prophet. I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. Verse 25. Immediately he stood up in front of them. He stood up in front of them. Now, friends, I think this guy was probably from that village or from one of the villages close by. He had to have been known. He probably was one who begged for alms. His friends perhaps laid him out on a mat during the day, and people would come and give him alms. And it says here that the Pharisees and the teachers of the law from every village in Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem were there. Whoever the local Pharisees and teachers of the law were who knew this man must have been there. There's no doubt in anybody's mind this man is legit, who's laying here, totally paralyzed, but he stands up before them at the command of Christ. Took what he'd been lying on, this mat that he lied on so often, paralyzed. And he went home. He went home.